Long before they ruled the globe, the English were simply trying to survive. In its early medieval history, England was a small, damp, divided island, highly vulnerable to massive invasions by Danish Vikings. For centuries, the English were geographically trapped. Internal conflicts like the War of the Roses drained their resources, while massive, heavily armed neighbors like France and Spain forced them into a constant game of military defense. This map illustrates the vast expansion of the known world following the discovery of the Americas. While England was tied up in European border disputes, rival powers like Spain and Portugal were extracting massive wealth from entirely new continents. The English realized that maintaining a defensive posture at home was a losing strategy. To survive in this rapidly expanding global economy, they had to push outward. In 1588, the existential threat arrived at their shores. Spanish King Philip II dispatched the Spanish Armada, a fleet of 130 heavily armed galleons carrying 30,000 men, to crush the English state and enforce Catholic rule. Outnumbered and outgunned, the English Navy relied on maneuverability. They packed 8 small vessels with flammable materials, set them ablaze, and steered these fire ships straight into the tightly packed Spanish formation. The tactic broke the Spanish lines. Panicked sailors scattered into the North Sea, where brutal storms and harsh currents battered the retreating fleet, destroying the remainder of the invasion force. The defeat of the Armada turned the water surrounding England into a launchpad, clearing the path for colonial ambition. The initial English pivot to the west was marked by hardship. Corporate expeditions like the Virginia Company faced starvation and disease in Jamestown, while Puritans sought religious isolation in the harsh climate of New England. But as those northern colonies struggled to survive, the empire found immediate, staggering profitability further south. By seizing Caribbean islands like Barbados and Jamaica, the English tapped into the highly lucrative cultivation of sugarcane. Caribbean sugar production relied on the transatlantic slave trade. The English engineered a mathematically precise loop, extracting hundreds of thousands of human beings from Africa, forcing their labor in the Caribbean, and funneling the resulting wealth straight back to London. The colonies codified this system with strict slave codes. In South Carolina, laws explicitly defined human beings as wild, disposable property, mandating brutal punishments like whipping or execution for any slave who attempted to leave a plantation. The extreme wealth generated in the Americas proved that the empire's economic growth relied on prioritizing extraction over human life and freedom. While fighting the French and Dutch for control of the Americas, Britain simultaneously directed its ambitions eastward, eyeing the vast resources of the Indian subcontinent. This eastern expansion began in 1608, when the British East India Company established a humble trading post in the port of Surat, exchanging English metalware for Indian textiles and spices. Over time, the company built its own private army. At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Robert Clive secured victory by leveraging betrayal, forging secret alliances with local officials like Mir Jafar, who defected in exchange for power. The East India Company systematically defeated French garrisons and regional Indian forces. They annexed territories and deposed local rulers, effectively privatizing the military conquest of an entire subcontinent. In 1765, they forced the declining Mughal Empire to sign the Treaty of Allahabad, granting the company Diwani rights. This agreement gave a private British corporation the legal authority to collect land taxes from millions of Indian citizens. Subjugating India was a heavily armed corporate takeover, with a private company managing the conquest of a subcontinent on behalf of its shareholders. The empire suffered a catastrophic blow in 1776 when the 13 North American colonies violently rejected British taxation and military presence. This document, the Declaration of Independence, formalized that rejection. It outlined 27 specific grievances against King George III and asserted the colony's absolute ideological right to self-governance. The conflict culminated in 1781 when American and French forces trapped the British Army at Yorktown. Losing these profitable territories dealt a severe financial and optical blow to the crown. Rather than retreat, the empire rapidly adapted. They turned their fleets away from the Americas and toward the newly mapped extreme frontier of Australia. With no American colonies left to absorb British prisoners, Captain Arthur Phillip guided a fleet of convicts on a grueling 8-month voyage to establish a new penal colony at Sydney Cove in New South Wales. Simultaneously, the British poured resources into their eastern holdings. They launched aggressive military campaigns across India, storming fortresses to kill leaders like Tipu Sultan and absorb the wealthy Mysore territories. The loss of America forced the British state to shift its weight. By closing one door, they aggressively accelerated their expansion into the Pacific and deeper into the Asian continent. Look at this map from the height of British power. After centuries of relentless pivots, a small European island amassed territory across the globe. Because these red territories stretched from Canada through Africa to India and Australia, the sun literally never set on the empire. Acquiring this land required the mass displacement and death of indigenous populations, from the Wampanoag in North America to the Kalinago in the Caribbean and the Aboriginal tribes in Australia. The systematic erasure of native cultures and languages followed the same tactics used to subdue the neighboring territories of Ireland and Scotland. The conquest of a quarter of the planet resulted from ruthless, opportunistic adaptability. This process defined the borders and the scars of the modern world.